I remember the moment my world shattered with perfect clarity. It wasn't when I found another woman's earring in his car, or when his texts became increasingly sparse and cold. It wasn't even when I noticed how he'd pull away slightly whenever I'd reach for his hand in public. No, my world truly collapsed on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday afternoon when I overheard 3 simple words that would forever change me. I never loved you. My boyfriend of 4 years, James, hadn't realized I was standing just around the corner of his apartment hallway. I'd come to surprise him with lunch, a peace offering after our most recent argument. The door had been slightly ajar, and I'd heard voices. His and another woman's. I'd paused, wondering if I should knock or wait until his visitor left. That's when I heard her ask, "But what about Emily? Don't you love her at all?" There was a pause, a sigh, and then those words that carved themselves into my soul. I never loved her. Not really. It was convenient, and she was always just there. But what I feel for you, Vanessa, it's different. It's real. My hands trembled so violently that the bag containing his favorite sandwich slipped from my fingers, landing with a soft thud on the carpeted hallway. I didn't bother picking it up. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It felt as though someone had reached inside my chest and was slowly, deliberately, crushing my heart. 4 years. 4 years of my life given to a man who never loved me. 4 years of building dreams together, of meeting his family, of planning our future. 4 years where apparently I had been nothing more than a convenience. I don't know how I made it back to my car. I don't remember driving home. The next clear memory I have is sitting on my bathroom floor, staring blankly at the shower curtain with mascara streaking down my cheeks and my phone buzzing incessantly beside me. It was James, of course. He'd found the abandoned lunch and was texting me, trying to call me. Each notification felt like another stab wound. James, hey, did you stop by? There's a sandwich outside my door. James, Emily? James, are you okay? James, please call me. The audacity. The sheer audacity of his concern when mere minutes before he'd been confessing that our entire relationship had been a lie. I turned my phone off and curled into myself on the cold tile floor, letting the sobs rack through my body until I was empty, hollow, a shell of the woman who had woken up that morning. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our relationship like a tragic film in my mind. Each "I love you" he'd uttered now felt like poison. Each kiss, each touch, each intimate moment. Had they all been performances? Had I been so desperate to be loved that I'd completely missed the signs? I thought back to the night he'd proposed just 6 months ago. It had been perfect. A private dinner at the restaurant where we'd had our first date, and then a walk along the riverfront where fairy lights twinkled in the trees. He'd gotten down on one knee, pulled out a ring that he said had belonged to his grandmother, and looked up at me with what I'd believed were tears of joy in his eyes. "Emily," he'd said, his voice quivering with what I now questioned was emotion or merely skilled acting, "you're the love of my life. I want to spend every day making you as happy as you make me. Will you marry me?" I'd cried. I'd said yes. I'd thrown my arms around him as nearby strangers applauded. I'd been so blindingly happy that I hadn't noticed a friend of mine capturing the whole thing on video from behind a nearby tree. James had arranged it all, wanting to preserve the moment forever. That video now sat in my cloud storage, along with hundreds of photos of us, evidence of what I'd thought was real love. The next morning, I awoke with swollen eyes and a decision. I wouldn't confront him. Not yet. I needed to understand the full scope of his betrayal first. I turned my phone back on to find 27 missed calls and a flurry of increasingly worried texts. With fingers that felt numb, I typed a simple response. "Sorry, lost my phone yesterday. Was running errands. Everything's fine." His relief was immediate and effusive, which only made the pain sharper. He cared enough to worry about my sudden disappearance, but not enough to love me honestly. Over the next few days, I performed the role of unsuspecting girlfriend while secretly watching his every move. I noted how he guarded his phone, how he had suddenly developed work emergencies that kept him late at the office, how he'd become oddly insistent about his privacy. It was during one of these performances that I discovered her name was indeed Vanessa Lambert. She worked with James at his law firm, not a lawyer like him, but a paralegal who had joined the team about 8 months ago. I found her on social media, and my stomach twisted when I saw her, beautiful in an effortless way, with dark curls and bright eyes that radiated confidence. I shouldn't have read their exchanges, but once I started, I couldn't stop. I'd picked up James's phone while he was in the shower, quickly entering the passcode I'd known for years. Their texts went back months, evolving from professional to flirtatious to explicitly romantic. I took screenshots and sent them to myself, then carefully deleted all traces of my digital snooping. The messages revealed more than just an affair. They revealed plans. Plans that included a future together, plans that very specifically excluded me. In one particularly painful exchange from just a week ago, James had written, "I'll break it off with Emily after the Henderson case wraps up. I just need to find the right moment. She's going to take it hard." Vanessa had replied, "You're doing the right thing. You deserve to be with someone you truly love." The calculated coldness of it all felt like ice in my veins. He was waiting for the right moment to discard me, meanwhile continuing our engagement, sleeping in my bed, accepting my love. That night, as he slept peacefully beside me, I stared at his face, the face I had loved so deeply, and felt something shift inside me. The overwhelming pain began to crystallize into something harder, colder, more focused. I wouldn't just walk away with my heart in pieces. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of breaking up with me when it was convenient for him. No, James and Vanessa would learn that there are consequences to treating someone's heart as collateral damage in their love story. The next morning, I began to plan. My first order of business was gathering intelligence. I created a detailed schedule of James's activities, noting patterns in his behavior, identifying when he was truly working late and when he was with her. I set up a separate email account and began documenting everything. The texts I'd discovered, timestamps of calls, photographs of them I managed to take from a distance when I, coincidentally, drove by places I knew they'd be. I also started therapy. Twice-weekly sessions became my anchor, a safe space where I could process my grief and rage without letting it consume me. My therapist, Dr. Rivera, never explicitly endorsed my growing desire for revenge, but she didn't condemn it either. Instead, she helped me understand the roots of my pain and ensured that whatever actions I chose to take wouldn't ultimately destroy me in the process. Betrayal of this magnitude fundamentally challenges our sense of reality, she explained during one session. Everything you believe to be true has been called into question. Your reaction, this anger, this desire for justice, it's normal. Is it justice I want? I asked quietly. Or revenge? She regarded me thoughtfully before answering. Perhaps it's validation. Perhaps you need to know that what happened to you matters, that your pain isn't invisible, that actions have consequences. Her words stayed with me, becoming something of a mantra as my plan began to take shape. 3 weeks after discovering the affair, I found what I needed to move forward. James had left his laptop open while he went to take a call on the balcony. His email was up, and there, in his inbox, was a message with the subject line, "Wedding venue options." My fingers trembled as I clicked on it. The email was from Vanessa, enthusiastically detailing 3 potential venues for their wedding. Their wedding. Not a theoretical future event, an actual wedding they were actively planning while I wore his grandmother's ring. I scrolled through the email, each word a fresh cut. They had a date in mind, just 5 months away. They had discussed color schemes and guest lists. It was real, tangible, happening. As James's voice drifted in from the balcony, still engaged in his call, I quickly took screenshots and emailed them to my secret account. Then I carefully returned the screen to exactly as I'd found it and moved away from the laptop, my mind racing. They weren't just having an affair. They weren't just planning a future together someday. They were planning to get married, which meant the realization hit me with such force that I had to sit down. James wasn't planning to break up with me at all, at least not before his wedding. He was planning to string me along until the last possible moment, perhaps to keep me as a backup option, perhaps out of cowardice, perhaps simply because it was convenient. That night, I lay awake beside him, studying the ceiling as I had so many nights since discovering his betrayal. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't paralyzed by pain. I was energized by certainty. I would let him have his wedding day, but it would not be the day he imagined. The next morning, I kissed James goodbye as he left for work, maintaining the facade of the loving, unsuspecting fiancé. The moment the door closed behind him, I sat down at my kitchen table and began to outline my plan in meticulous detail. Step 1, I needed to secure an invitation to the wedding. This proved surprisingly simple. Through careful monitoring of their communications, I had by now figured out how to access James's email remotely. I learned that they were keeping their relationship relatively quiet at work due to professional concerns. Vanessa had only told a few close friends about their relationship and their wedding plans. I reached out to one of these friends, Sophie, whom I'd met briefly at a firm event months earlier. I crafted a careful story about planning a surprise for Vanessa's birthday and managed to build enough rapport that Sophie eventually mentioned the upcoming wedding. I expressed genuine surprise, not difficult given the circumstances, and convincingly played the role of someone hearing this news for the first time. "Oh my God, I had no idea they were so serious," I exclaimed during our coffee meetup. Wow, good for them." Sophie looked slightly uncomfortable. "Yeah, it's happening pretty quickly. But when you know, right?" I forced a smile. "Absolutely. When's the big day?" "June 18th, she replied, then added with a laugh, "I probably shouldn't be telling you all this. I think they're trying to keep it somewhat low-key." "Your secret's safe with me," I assured her, and in a sense it was. I had no intention of disrupting their plans prematurely. Step 2, I needed to understand exactly what their wedding would entail. This required more careful sleuthing. Over the next few weeks, I pieced together details from various sources, James's emails, social media posts from Vanessa's friends, and the occasional information I could extract from James himself by asking seemingly innocent questions about his work schedule. I discovered they had chosen the Riverside Gardens venue, an elegant space known for its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city's waterfront. The ceremony would be at 4 p.m., followed by cocktails and then dinner. They expected about 80 guests, mostly family and close friends. The color scheme was navy and silver. Each new detail I uncovered felt like another piece of a puzzle that, when completed, would reveal the perfect moment for me to step into their carefully orchestrated day. Step 3. I needed to prepare myself emotionally. This was perhaps the most challenging aspect of my plan. I continued my therapy sessions, working through the complex tangle of emotions that threatened to overwhelm me. There were days when my resolve wavered, when the sheer exhaustion of maintaining my deception made me consider simply confronting James and walking away. On one such day, I broke down during my session with Dr. Rivera. "Sometimes I wonder if this is worth it," I confessed, tears streaming down my face. "If I should just tell him I know and leave, move on with my life." "Doctor?" Rivera handed me a tissue. "You could do that?" she acknowledged. "Many would say that's the healthier choice." "But," I prompted, hearing the unspoken qualifier in her tone, "but some wounds need different forms of closure. The question isn't just what you do, but how you'll feel about your choice years from now. Will walking away silently leave you with regrets? Will executing this plan bring you the peace you're seeking? Only you can answer that." I considered her words carefully. Would I regret not standing up for myself? Would I always wonder if James and Vanessa ever truly faced the consequences of their actions? Would I spend years replaying scenarios in my mind where I didn't simply disappear from their story? The answer was clear. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my narrative, refusing to be cast as the unsuspecting, passive victim in their love story. Step 4. I needed to continue my relationship with James while secretly dismantling it. This was a delicate balance. I had to appear normal enough that he wouldn't suspect anything, while gradually creating distance that would make my eventual disappearance less jarring. I began working later, joining a book club that met weekly, and generally making myself less available to him. James hardly seemed to notice. If anything, he appeared relieved to have more time to himself, time I knew he was spending with Vanessa. I also began quietly separating our lives in practical ways. I moved most of my important documents and sentimental possessions to a storage unit. I opened a new bank account at a different bank and gradually transferred small sums of money to avoid raising flags. I researched apartments in different neighborhoods, places where we had no mutual connections. All the while, I continued to sleep beside him, to kiss him goodbye in the mornings, to ask about his day over dinner. The performance was exhausting, but with each passing day, I grew more committed to seeing my plan through. As months passed, I settled into a strange dual existence. On the surface, I was Emily the fiancé, growing incrementally more distant but still fundamentally committed to the relationship. Beneath that carefully maintained facade, I was Emily the strategist, methodically preparing for the day when I would reveal the truth and then vanish from James's life forever. I also began working on what would be the centerpiece of my plan, the proposal video. The original footage was about 3 minutes long, capturing the entire sweet moment from James getting down on one knee to our embrace after I said yes. But there was more to the story now, and I wanted to tell it completely. I taught myself basic video editing and began creating something new. I interspersed the proposal footage with screenshots of James and Vanessa's texts, emails about their wedding plans, and photos I'd taken of them together when they thought no one was watching. I set it to the song that had been our song, the one that James had apparently recycled for his relationship with Vanessa, according to their texts. The resulting video was just under 5 minutes long. 5 minutes that told the complete story of a man who proposed to one woman while planning a life with another. 5 minutes that transformed a seemingly romantic moment into evidence of breathtaking duplicity. As June approached, I finalized the last details of my plan. I secured an apartment in a different part of the city, paid 3 months' rent in advance, and arranged for my remaining possessions to be moved there on the morning of June 18th, the wedding day. I submitted my resignation letter to my company, effective the day after the wedding, with a request to use my remaining vacation days immediately. I notified my closest friends that I would be taking some time away for personal reasons without elaborating further. I was systematically erasing my old life, preparing to step into a new one the moment my task was complete. The night before the wedding, James told me he would be staying at a friend's place after a work event. The lie rolled off his tongue so easily, his eyes meeting mine without a hint of guilt or hesitation. I wondered, not for the first time, how someone could become so comfortable with deception. "Have fun," I said, kissing him lightly. "Don't stay out too late." "I won't," he promised, another easy lie. "I love you." Those words, once cherished, now scraped against my heart like broken glass. But I smiled and echoed them back to him, knowing it would be the last time I ever said them. After he left, I sat alone in our apartment, soon to be just his apartment, and allowed myself one final evening of grief. I cried for the future I had believed in, for the man I had thought James was, for the years I had invested in something that had been a mirage all along. But as midnight approached, I dried my tears and focused on the day ahead. I had chosen my outfit carefully. A deep blue dress that was elegant without being flashy, something appropriate for a wedding guest, but not so noticeable that I would draw immediate attention. I laid it out alongside the small clutch purse that would hold the USB drive containing my video. I slept surprisingly well that night, as if my body recognized that I needed strength for what was to come. When I awoke, there was a strange sense of calm washing over me. Today was not just the day of James and Vanessa's wedding. It was the day I would reclaim my dignity and then begin again. The morning passed in a series of methodical actions. The moving company arrived at 9 a.m. to collect the last of my possessions. I performed a final sweep of the apartment, ensuring I had left nothing important behind. I changed my phone number, updated my address with essential services, and sent a scheduled email to James that would deliver after the wedding. A simple message that read only, "Now you know how it feels. Don't try to find me." By 2 p.m. I was dressed and ready. I looked at myself in the mirror one last time before leaving the apartment, struck by how composed I appeared despite the storm of emotions within. "You can do this," I told my reflection. "One last act and then you're free." The drive to Riverside Gardens took about 30 minutes. I parked some distance away, not wanting to risk being spotted too early, and waited in my car until 3:30 p.m. According to my intelligence, guests would be seated by 3:45, with the ceremony beginning promptly at 4 p.m. At 3:35, I walked calmly toward the venue, my heart rate surprisingly steady. The usher at the door smiled at me, not asking which side I was on, merely directing me toward the garden where white chairs were arranged in neat rows facing a flower-covered arch. I chose a seat near the back on Vanessa's side, where James would be less likely to spot me immediately. More guests filtered in around me, but no one seemed to pay me particular attention. I was just another face in the crowd, exactly as I had planned. At precisely 4 p.m., music began to play, and James appeared from a side entrance, walking to take his place at the altar. My breath caught in my throat at the sight of him in his tuxedo, the man I had once believed would be waiting for me at the end of an aisle. He looked happy, nervous perhaps, but genuinely happy in a way that twisted the knife deeper. This was real for him. He truly loved Vanessa in a way he had never loved me. The procession began. First the groomsmen and bridesmaids, then a flower girl scattering white petals along the aisle. And then the music changed, and everyone stood, turning to watch as Vanessa appeared in a stunning white gown, her father at her side. She was beautiful, radiant with the kind of joy that can't be faked. For a brief moment I felt a flicker of doubt. Was I really going to shatter this moment for her? She was, in many ways, as much a victim of James's deception as I was. She presumably had no idea about me, about our engagement that had never officially ended. But then I remembered the texts, her eager planning of their wedding while I wore his ring, her words, "You're doing the right thing. You deserve to be with someone you truly love." Perhaps she didn't know the full extent of his lies, but she knew enough. She knew he was in a relationship he needed to end, and she had happily planned a future with him before he had done so. No, I wouldn't spare her this truth. They both deserved to face it. Vanessa reached the altar and the guests took their seats. The officiant smiled at the couple and began to speak. "Friends and family, we are gathered here today to celebrate the union of James Harrington and Vanessa Lambert in marriage." I sat perfectly still, listening to the familiar words about love and commitment, trust and honesty. The irony might have been amusing under different circumstances. And then came the moment I had been waiting for. Before we proceed with the vows, the officiant said, "If anyone knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in marriage, speak now or forever hold your peace." I rose to my feet, my movement deliberate and unhurried. A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd as heads turned toward me. "I have a reason," I said, my voice clear and steady in the sudden silence. James's head snapped in my direction, his expression moving from confusion to shock to horror in the span of seconds. "Emily?" he gasped, loud enough for those nearest to hear. "What are you—" "I think there's something everyone here should see before these vows are exchanged," I continued, moving toward the small table where a laptop was connected to the venue's projection system, ready to display a photo montage during the reception. One of the groomsmen moved as if to stop me, but James held up a hand, clearly trying to prevent a scene. "Emily, please," he said, his voice strained. "Whatever this is, we can talk about it privately." I ignored him, reaching into my clutch for the USB drive. "This won't take long," I assured the bewildered crowd, some of whom were now whispering urgently to each other. "I just have a short video I'd like to share." Vanessa stood frozen beside James, her beautiful face a mask of confusion and growing alarm. "James? Who is this? What's happening?" I inserted the USB drive into the laptop and quickly navigated to the video file. "I'm Emily," I told her directly, our eyes meeting for the first time. "James's fiancée. Or at least I was until very recently. Apparently he forgot to mention that to you." The gasps and murmurs grew louder. James took a step toward me, panic evident in every line of his body. "Emily, stop this right now." "No, James. You stop." My finger hovered over the play button. "You don't get to lie anymore." And then I pressed play, stepping back as the large projection screen came to life, displaying the video for everyone to see. The footage began with James on one knee, looking up at me with what I had once believed was adoration. His voice filled the garden. "Emily, you're the love of my life. I want to spend every day making you as happy as you make me. Will you marry me?" My tearful yes. And our embrace played out for all to witness, followed immediately by a screenshot of a text from James to Vanessa. "I never loved her. Not really. It was convenient and she was always just there. But what I feel for you, Vanessa, it's different. It's real." The juxtaposition was devastating in its simplicity. The video continued, methodically presenting the evidence of James's double life, the wedding plans he and Vanessa had made while I still wore his ring, the lies he had told us both, the calculated way he had strung me along. I watched the audience's reactions rather than the screen, the shock on their faces, the hands covering mouths, the looks of disgust directed at James. But mostly, I watched Vanessa, whose expression crumbled as the truth unfolded before her. She took one step back from James, then another, her bouquet hanging limply at her side. When the video ended, the silence that followed was absolute. No one moved, as if the collective shock had frozen the entire gathering in place. I cleared my throat, suddenly aware that every eye was now on me. "I'm not here to ask for him back," I said clearly. "I wouldn't take him if he begged. I'm here because I believe the truth matters, and because both Vanessa and I deserved better than to be betrayed by someone who claimed to love us." I turned to address Vanessa directly. "I'm sorry it happened this way." "I truly am. But I thought you should know exactly who you are marrying today." She stared at me, tears streaking her carefully applied makeup, and then looked at James with an expression of such raw hurt that it was almost difficult to witness. "Is it true?" she whispered to him. "Were you engaged to her this whole time? Did you say those things?" James's face had drained of all color. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then finally managed, "Vanessa, please, I can explain. Is it true?" she repeated, her voice stronger now, edged with fury. He swallowed hard. "Yes, but it's not what it looks like." Vanessa didn't let him finish. She took 2 quick steps forward and slapped him across the face with such force that the sound echoed through the garden. Then she turned and walked back down the aisle, ignoring the calls of her parents and friends, disappearing through the entrance doors. The garden erupted into chaos. Guests began rising from their seats, some moving to comfort family members, others simply trying to leave the scene of such public humiliation. James stood alone at the altar, looking utterly lost as his best man and parents approached him, their expressions a mix of concern and unmistakable disappointment. I felt a strange detachment watching it all unfold, as if I were observing a scene in a film rather than the culmination of my own careful planning. There was satisfaction, yes, but it was quieter than I had anticipated, a gentle hum of rightness rather than the triumphant surge I had imagined. As the commotion continued around me, I slipped the USB drive back into my clutch and made my way toward the exit. No one tried to stop me. In the confusion, I was just another guest leaving a wedding that had spectacularly imploded. At the doorway, I paused and looked back one last time. James was still standing by the altar, his father speaking intently to him while he stared blankly ahead. Our eyes met across the distance, and for a moment, everything else seemed to fade away. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I simply held his gaze, letting him see the truth in my eyes, that I had loved him completely, and that his betrayal had created this moment. Then I turned and walked out the door, leaving behind the chaos, leaving behind James, leaving behind the woman I had been when I loved him. The air outside felt cleaner somehow, easier to breathe. I walked to my car without hurrying, each step taking me further from my old life and closer to the new one that awaited me. As I drove away from Riverside Gardens, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing behind me now that I needed to see again. My phone, with its new number that James didn't have, buzzed with a text from Dr. Rivera, checking in. "How are you feeling?" I considered the question carefully as I navigated toward my new apartment across town. How was I feeling? Relieved, certainly. Vindicated, yes. But most surprisingly, I felt unburdened, as if I had been carrying a weight for so long that I had forgotten what it was like to move without it. "Free," I texted back. "I feel free." And for the first time in months, I smiled a real smile. Not the practiced one I had worn for James's benefit, but a genuine expression of the lightness spreading through me. The tears would come later, I knew. The deeper processing of all that had happened and all I had lost. But for now, driving toward my future with the windows down and the past receding behind me, I allowed myself to simply feel the liberation of truth finally spoken, and justice, in its own imperfect way, served. I had shown him the video of him proposing to me at his wedding, and in doing so, I had released us both from the lies that had bound us together. His future would unfold however it would, with or without Vanessa, with or without remorse for what he had done. It was no longer my concern. My future, on the other hand, was entirely my own, uncertain perhaps, but authentically mine, free from deception and the pain of loving someone who had never truly loved me in return. As I approached my new home, I made a promise to myself. I would never again accept less than I deserved. I would never again silence my instincts for the comfort of illusion, and I would never, ever allow someone else's lies to define my worth. The sun was setting as I parked in front of my new apartment building, casting long shadows across the unfamiliar street. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, unpacking, settling in, beginning to build a life from scratch. But tonight, I would celebrate small victories. The truth revealed, my dignity reclaimed, my heart broken but miraculously still beating. I was Emily, redefined not by what had been done to me, but by what I had chosen to do in response. And that, I realized as I climbed the stairs to my new door, was perhaps the most satisfying revenge of all. My phone buzzed again. "Dr. Rivera," replying to my text. "Freedom is just the beginning. The real work starts now." I smiled at her words, recognizing their truth. Yes, the real work. The work of healing, of rediscovering myself, of building a life untethered to betrayal, was just beginning. But for the first time in months, I felt ready for it. Eager even. I unlocked the door to my new apartment and stepped inside. Empty walls, bare floors, unfamiliar spaces. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. A blank canvas. A fresh start. "Hello," I said aloud to the empty rooms, my voice echoing slightly. "I'm Emily. It's nice to meet you." The real me this time. And somewhere deep inside, that real Emily, the one who had been silenced by lies and battered by betrayal, began to stir and wake, ready to reclaim her life, one truth at a time. It had been 6 weeks since I'd walked away from James's wedding, and I was slowly beginning to rebuild my life. My new apartment was gradually taking shape, transforming from an empty shell into something that felt like home. I had painted the walls myself, a soft sage green in the living room, a peaceful blue in the bedroom, and had purchased only furniture that spoke to me, rather than compromising my taste as I so often had with James. My new job at a different marketing firm had started 2 weeks after the wedding, and while I was still finding my footing there, the fresh environment felt cleansing. No one knew my history. No one gave me pitying looks or whispered about the woman who had been engaged to a man who loved someone else. I was just Emily, the new creative director with innovative ideas and a quiet determination. I had maintained minimal contact with my old life. A few close friends knew where I was and checked in regularly, but I had asked them not to share any information about James or the aftermath of the wedding. I wasn't hiding from what had happened. I had shared the full story with my new therapist, Dr. Chen, whom I'd started seeing after relocating, but I needed space to heal without constant reminders of the betrayal. Dr. Chen had a different approach than Dr. Rivera. Where Rivera had been somewhat permissive of my revenge planning, Chen focused heavily on moving forward. "The past has already taken enough from you," she said during our second session. "How much more of your present are you willing to give it?" It was a perspective I needed, a gentle nudge toward building rather than dwelling. Under her guidance, I had started journaling daily, joined a local hiking group to meet new people, and even signed up for a pottery class, something I had always wanted to try but had never pursued because James had dismissed it as messy and pointless. On this particular evening, I was returning home from my third pottery class, my hands still faintly stained with clay despite thorough washing, when I noticed a figure sitting on the steps of my building. My heart stuttered in my chest as I recognized the silhouette immediately. Vanessa. I slowed my pace, considering whether to turn around and avoid the confrontation. But then I straightened my shoulders and continued forward. I had nothing to hide, nothing to apologize for. Whatever she wanted to say, I could hear it. She looked up as I approached, her expression difficult to read in the fading light. She was still beautiful, though perhaps a bit thinner than she had been at the wedding, with shadows under her eyes suggesting she hadn't been sleeping well. "Emily," she said simply as I reached the steps. "Vanessa," I replied, stopping a few feet away. "How did you find me?" She gave a small, humorless smile. "It wasn't easy. You've done an impressive job of disappearing. But Sophie, my friend who apparently met with you before the wedding, she remembered the name of the book club you said you'd joined. I called every branch of that club in the city until I found one that recognized your name from a recent meeting." I nodded, making a mental note to be more careful about such details in the future, though I supposed it didn't matter much now. "Why are you here?" She rose to her feet, brushing off her tailored pants with a gesture that seemed more nervous than necessary. "Can we talk?" "Not here, maybe. Is there a cafe or something nearby?" I hesitated, studying her face. She didn't appear angry, which was surprising given the circumstances of our last encounter. If anything, she looked tired and perhaps a little lost. "There's a coffee shop around the corner," I finally offered. "But I have to ask, what is there to talk about? I think the video said everything that needed saying." "The video told me what James did," she replied quietly. "But it didn't tell me who you are, or why you chose to reveal everything the way you did. I have questions, and maybe you do too." She was right. I did have questions, ones that had surfaced during my therapy sessions and late-night ruminations. Questions about how long she had known about me, whether James had told her the same lies he had told me, whether she had ever suspected the depth of his deception. "All right," I agreed. Coffee it is. We walked in silence to the small cafe on the corner, a cozy place with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. At this hour it was nearly empty, allowing us to choose a secluded table by the window. We ordered a simple black coffee for her, a chai latte for me, and then sat facing each other, the weight of our shared history hanging between us. "I didn't marry him," she said abruptly, as if needing to establish this fact immediately. "Obviously. I didn't expect you would after what you learned," I replied. She wrapped her hands around her mug, staring down into the dark liquid. Did you know the whole time we were together?" I shook my head. "No. I found out about 4 months before your wedding. I overheard him telling you he never loved me." Her eyes widened slightly. "That day in his apartment? You were there? Just outside the door. I'd come to bring him lunch?" She closed her eyes briefly, a pained expression crossing her face. "God, I remember that conversation. I'd asked him about you because he still had photos of you on his social media, and he'd mentioned you were having dinner together that weekend. I was confused about where things stood between you two." "And he told you he never loved me?" I said, the words still carrying their sting despite the time that had passed. "Yes," she admitted, looking genuinely ashamed, "and I believed him. I thought he was just taking time to end things kindly with you. I never knew you were engaged. He told me you were just casually dating, that it had never been serious." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "We lived together for 3 years. He proposed 6 months before I heard that conversation. Nothing casual about it." "I know that now," she said quietly. The video made that abundantly clear. She paused, taking a sip of her coffee. "Can I ask, why did you wait? Why not confront him immediately after you discovered the affair?" It was a fair question, one I had asked myself many times in the dark hours of early mornings. At first it was shock, I explained. I couldn't process what was happening. Then, as I learned more about the wedding plans, about how long it had been going on, I realized that simply confronting him wouldn't be enough. He would have apologized, made excuses, maybe even tried to convince me to stay. But nothing would have changed. He wouldn't have faced any real consequences for what he'd done to both of us. "So you decided to expose him at our wedding," she stated, no judgment in her tone, merely seeking confirmation. I nodded. "It wasn't just about revenge, though that was part of it. It was about truth. You deserved to know who you were marrying. I deserved to reclaim my story. And James? James deserved to face the reality of his actions in front of everyone who mattered to him." Vanessa was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "I was so angry at you at first," she finally admitted. "It was easier to be angry at you than to face what James had done. But then, as weeks passed and I had time to think, I realized you gave me something invaluable. You saved me from marrying a man who was capable of that level of deception." She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "So thank you. As painful as it was, thank you for telling me the truth." Her gratitude caught me off guard. I had imagined this conversation many times, but always as a confrontation, never as an expression of appreciation. "You're welcome," I said simply, because there was nothing else to say. "Have you heard from him?" she asked after another moment of silence. "No," I replied. "I changed my number, moved, got a new job. I made it very clear I didn't want to be found." She nodded. "He tried to contact me for weeks. Calls, texts, emails, even showing up at my workplace. He had explanations for everything, of course. Said the video was edited to make him look worse, that he had planned to tell me about you, that he did love you once but things had changed, that his feelings for me were real." She trailed off, shaking her head. "Eventually I got a restraining order. He's respected that at least. I absorbed this information, trying to reconcile it with the James I had known. Had he tried to find me with the same desperation? Had he crafted careful explanations for my benefit too? Or had he simply let me go, recognizing that his deception had been too completely exposed to ever be forgiven? "Do you ever wonder," Vanessa began, then hesitated. "What? Do you ever wonder if any of it was real? His feelings for either of us?" It was a question that had haunted me during countless sleepless nights. "I don't know," I admitted. "Sometimes I think he must have loved me once in his way. Other times I think he just loved the idea of having someone who adored him, who made life comfortable and easy. And with you," I paused, choosing my words carefully. "With you, maybe it was the excitement of something new, the thrill of a secret. Or maybe he did love you more than he ever loved me. I don't think we'll ever really know." She gave a sad smile. "Perhaps it doesn't matter now." Whatever he felt or didn't feel, his actions spoke louder than any words could. We fell into silence again, each lost in our own thoughts. Outside, the streetlights had come on, casting a soft glow through the cafe window. It was strange, sitting across from the woman who had unwittingly shared my fiancé, finding a kind of solidarity in our mutual betrayal. "What happens now?" I finally asked. "After you leave this cafe, I mean, what are you doing with your life?" She seemed surprised by the question, as if she hadn't expected me to care about her future. "I'm taking some time to figure that out. I left the law firm, couldn't stand the whispers and the pitying looks. I'm considering going back to school, maybe for social work. Something completely different." She smiled faintly. "I've also adopted a cat. That's been surprisingly therapeutic. Cats are good that way." I agreed, thinking of the small gray kitten I'd rescued from the shelter 2 weeks earlier, now the sole roommate in my new life. "And you?" she asked. "Are you okay?" The question was simple but loaded with meaning. Was I okay after having my heart shattered, my future derailed, my trust decimated? Was I okay after exacting a revenge that had brought both satisfaction and a lingering sadness? "I'm getting there," I said honestly. "Some days are harder than others, but I'm building something new, something that's entirely mine. There's freedom in that, even amid the pain." She nodded as if she understood perfectly, and perhaps she did. Perhaps of all people, she was uniquely positioned to comprehend exactly what I had lost and what I was trying to find again. "I should go," she said, finishing the last of her coffee. I needed to see you. To thank you, I guess, and maybe to confirm that you're as human as I am. That we were both just collateral damage in whatever game James was playing." I understood her need. I had wondered about her too, whether she was healing, whether she had moments of missing him despite everything, whether she sometimes questioned if she could have done something differently. We walked out of the cafe together, pausing on the sidewalk where our paths would diverge. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of approaching autumn. "I hope you find what you're looking for," I told her, surprised by how genuinely I meant it. "The future you deserve." "You too, Emily," she replied, then hesitated before adding, "Do you think we might have been friends in a different life?" I considered the question, studying her face. This woman who had once been my unwitting rival, now standing before me as something closer to an ally. "Maybe," I said, "in a life where James never existed." She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "I'd like to think so." Then she extended her hand, a surprisingly formal gesture given the intimacy of our conversation. "Goodbye, Emily. I won't try to find you again. I think we both need clean breaks from anything connected to him." I took her hand, completing this strange ritual of closure. "Goodbye, Vanessa. Take care of yourself." We parted ways then, Vanessa heading toward the main avenue while I turned back toward my apartment building. As I walked, I felt an unexpected lightness in my chest, as if another small weight had been lifted. Our conversation had provided something I hadn't known I needed, a connection with the only other person who fully understood what James had done, a confirmation that I wasn't alone in my experience of his betrayal. When I reached my apartment, I found my kitten Luna waiting expectantly by the door. I scooped her up, burying my face in her soft fur for a moment before carrying her to the window. Outside, the city stretched before us, a landscape of lights and possibilities. "Well, Luna?" I murmured. That was unexpected. She purred in response, utterly unconcerned with the complexities of human relationships. I envied her simplicity, her ability to live fully in the present without the weight of the past. As I prepared for bed that night, I thought about Vanessa's question. Could we have been friends in another life? It was impossible to know, of course, but there had been a genuine connection between us, a shared understanding forged in the unique fire of loving and losing the same man. I opened my journal, a habit I had maintained faithfully since beginning therapy with Dr. Chen, and wrote about the encounter. As I described the conversation, analyzed my feelings, and reflected on what it meant for my healing journey, I realized something important. My revenge had been not just an ending, but a beginning. By exposing James's lies at his wedding, I had set in motion a chain of events that had freed not only myself, but Vanessa as well. We had both been given the chance to escape a man who had valued his own desires above our hearts, who had treated love as something to be manipulated rather than cherished. Vulnerability has its own kind of strength. I wrote in my journal, a thought that had been forming slowly over the weeks of rebuilding my life. In showing the truth, however painful, we create space for authentic healing. I closed the journal and turned out the light, Luna curling against my side in the darkness. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and victories, its moments of doubt and clarity. But tonight, after my unexpected meeting with Vanessa, I felt a strange peace settling over me. Not because the pain was gone, but because I could finally see beyond it to the person I was becoming. The person who had stood up at a wedding and demanded truth, who had walked away from lies even when staying would have been easier, who was now, piece by piece, creating a life built on authenticity rather than illusion. That person, that Emily, was someone I was proud to be. 3 months had passed since my encounter with Vanessa, and life had settled into a new rhythm. My apartment now truly felt like home, adorned with plants, artwork I'd chosen myself, and even a few pieces of pottery from my continuing classes. Luna had grown from a timid kitten into a confident cat who claimed the apartment as thoroughly her own. My job had evolved from something that simply paid the bills into a position where I felt valued and creative. In those 3 months, I had also begun to date again, cautiously, hesitantly, but with an openness to possibilities that surprised me. Dr. Chen had encouraged me not to close myself off from connection, while also helping me navigate the trust issues that inevitably surfaced. The goal isn't to never be hurt again, she had explained during one session. That's impossible if you want to live fully. The goal is to trust yourself to handle whatever comes, to know that no betrayal can destroy you unless you allow it to. Her words had resonated deeply, giving me permission to venture back into the world of romantic relationships without expecting perfection, from potential partners or from myself. I had gone on a handful of first dates, most pleasant enough but lacking that essential spark of connection. Then, 2 weeks ago, I had met Daniel at a bookstore event, a poetry reading I'd attended on a whim. He was thoughtful and quietly funny, a high school English teacher with kind eyes and a genuine interest in people's stories. We had talked for hours after the reading, and I had found myself laughing in a way I hadn't in longer than I could remember. We had seen each other 3 times since then, each date confirming my initial impression that he was someone worth knowing better. He knew the broad strokes of my history with James. I had been upfront about having recently ended a serious relationship, but I hadn't shared the full story of the wedding and my revenge. That felt like something to be revealed gradually, when trust had been more firmly established. On this particular evening, I was preparing dinner in my apartment, expecting Daniel to arrive in about an hour, when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I nearly let it go to voicemail, assuming it was a telemarketer, but something compelled me to answer. Hello? There was a brief silence and then, Emily? Is that you? My body went cold at the sound of James's voice. I hadn't heard it in 7 months, not since that day at the wedding when he had pleaded with me to stop the video. Yet I recognized it instantly, as if no time had passed at all. How did you get this number? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. He sighed. A familiar sound that once would have tugged at my heart, but now only increased my wariness. It wasn't easy, but I needed to talk to you. I leaned against the kitchen counter, trying to process this unexpected intrusion into the life I had so carefully rebuilt. I don't think we have anything to say to each other, James. Please, he said, and I could hear the desperation in his voice. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. I should have hung up. Everything, doctor. Chen had taught me about boundaries, and self-protection suggested that was the right course of action. But curiosity, or perhaps some need for final closure, kept me on the line. 5 minutes, I agreed coolly. Starting now, he exhaled heavily. Thank you. God, I've rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times, and now I don't know where to begin. Maybe with how you found me, I suggested, unwilling to make this easy for him. Right. I hired a private investigator, he admitted. After months of trying everything else, your parents wouldn't tell me anything. Your friends blocked my calls. You'd vanished so completely. I just wanted to know you were okay. The thought of him hiring someone to track me down was both disturbing and oddly validating, evidence that my disappearance had affected him as I'd intended. I'm fine, I said shortly. Is that all? No, Emily, that's not all. There was an edge to his voice now, frustration breaking through the contrition. What you did at the wedding? What I did? I interrupted, heat rising in my chest. You mean exposing the truth about your relationship with Vanessa? About how you were engaged to me while planning to marry her? It wasn't that simple, he protested. You know relationships are complicated. Yes, I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but what you did, you destroyed everything in one day. My relationship with Vanessa, my standing at the firm, my relationships with friends and family. Everyone looks at me differently now. I laughed, though there was no humor in it. Are you seriously calling to complain about the consequences of your own actions? Did you expect me to just disappear quietly while you married someone else? No, He stopped, then tried again. I'm not explaining this well. I'm not blaming you. I deserved what happened. I know that. I wanted to apologize, properly, for everything. I closed my eyes, suddenly tired. James, it's been 7 months. Why now? There was a pause before he answered. I've been in therapy, intensive therapy, trying to understand why I did what I did, why I hurt the two people who cared about me most. And part of my recovery is making amends where possible. Amends, I repeated, testing the word. What does that even mean in this context? It means acknowledging the pain I caused you, he said quietly. It means telling you that you were right to do what you did, that I was a coward who couldn't face the truth about my own feelings. It means saying I'm sorry, Emily. Truly sorry. I stood in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the apology I had once desperately wanted to hear. But now, surrounded by the life I had built without him, his words felt strangely hollow. Not because they weren't sincere, but because they no longer held the power to heal me. I had already healed myself. Thank you for the apology, I said finally. I appreciate that you're trying to make things right. Is there any chance we could meet? Just to talk? I understand if you don't want to, but I thought maybe— No, I interrupted gently but firmly. I don't think that would be helpful for either of us. I've moved on, James. I hope you can too. He was silent for a long moment. You sound different, he said eventually. Stronger. I am, I confirmed. Losing you, or rather losing who I thought you were, forced me to find parts of myself I didn't know existed. I'm glad, he said, and surprisingly he sounded like he meant it. You deserve to be happy, Emily. So do you, I replied, realizing I meant it too, despite everything. Not because he deserved forgiveness for what he'd done, but because holding on to bitterness would only hurt me in the end. I hope your therapy helps you figure things out. It is, he assured me, slowly but surely. He paused. Have you spoken to Vanessa at all? The question surprised me. Once, a few months ago. She found me. How is she? He asked softly. I considered how much to share, then decided on honesty. She's healing, building a new life like I am. Good, he said. That's good. Another pause. Your 5 minutes are probably up. They are, I agreed, glancing at the clock. Thank you for answering. For listening. I won't contact you again unless you want me to. It was a promise I appreciated, a recognition of boundaries that the old James would never have offered. Goodbye, James, I said, my voice gentle but final. Goodbye, Emily, he replied, and then the line went dead. I stood motionless in my kitchen for several minutes after the call ended, processing the unexpected conversation. There was a time when hearing his voice would have broken me open again, when his apology would have seemed like everything I needed. Now it felt like closing a book I had already finished reading. Important, but no longer central to my story. The sound of a text alert broke my reverie. It was Daniel, on my way, bringing wine and that cheese you liked. Hope that's okay. I smiled at the message, feeling a wave of gratitude for this new person in my life who asked before bringing things, who respected boundaries, who seemed to genuinely enjoy my company without any hidden agendas. Perfect, I texted back. See you soon. I returned to preparing dinner, chopping vegetables for the pasta sauce with renewed focus. Luna wound around my ankles, purring loudly, seemingly attuned to my emotional state. That was the past calling, I told her, bending to scratch behind her ears. But we're not going back there, are we? She blinked at me solemnly, then continued her feline patrol of the kitchen, completely present in the moment as only animals can be. When Daniel arrived an hour later, I greeted him with a lightness I hadn't expected to feel after James's call. We cooked together, sharing stories about our day, laughing over Luna's determined attempts to investigate the shopping bag he'd brought. Over dinner, I found myself wanting to share more of my history with him. Not the full dramatic story, perhaps, but enough that he could understand the path that had led me to this point, to this table, to him. There's something I should probably tell you about my previous relationship, I began. He looked up from his pasta, his expression open. Only if you want to, he said. No pressure. His response, simple but respectful, confirmed what I had been feeling. This was someone I could trust with my story, someone who wouldn't use it against me or make it about himself. I do want to, I decided. Not everything tonight, but the beginning at least. And so, over glasses of wine and the remains of our meal, I began to tell him about James, about loving someone who had built a relationship on deception, about learning to trust my instincts again afterward. I didn't mention the wedding or the video, those details could wait for another time, but I shared enough that he could understand the scars I carried and why certain things might be difficult for me. He listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions, expressing appropriate indignation at what I'd experienced without making it a performance. When I finished, he reached across the table and gently took my hand. "Thank you for trusting me with that," he said simply. "Thank you for listening," I replied. Later that night, after Daniel had gone home with plans to meet again in a few days, I sat at my window seat with Luna curled in my lap, looking out at the city lights. I thought about the strange symmetry of the day, James's call reaching back to the past, my dinner with Daniel pointing toward a possible future. I hadn't planned for either of these men to be part of my life at this juncture. James's call had been an uninvited reminder of who I had been. Daniel's presence was an unexpected invitation to discover who I might become. Both, in their way, were helping me understand how far I had traveled from that devastated woman who had stood outside James's apartment door, hearing that she had never been loved. I opened my journal and wrote about the day, recording James's apology and my surprising emotional response to it. I wrote about the dinner with Daniel, about the way trust was slowly building between us, about how different it felt to share myself with someone who seemed genuinely interested in knowing me, all of me, including the broken parts. As I closed the journal, I realized that the revenge I had orchestrated at James's wedding had served its purpose beyond what I could have imagined. It hadn't just exposed his lies or spared Vanessa from marrying a man capable of deep deception. It had also freed me, not just from James, but from the version of myself that had accepted less than she deserved, that had ignored red flags, that had been willing to silence her own instincts to maintain an illusion of love. That Emily was gone, transformed through pain and courage and the hard work of rebuilding into someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who understood that true love could only be built on honesty, with others and, most importantly, with oneself. As I prepared for bed, I found myself thinking of the proposal video that had been the centerpiece of my revenge. I had kept it, stored on a flash drive tucked away in a drawer. Not to revisit or replay, but as a reminder of where I had been and how far I had come. Perhaps someday I would delete it, when the memory no longer held any power at all. But for now, it remained, not as an open wound, but as a scar that had healed, marking a battle I had survived and, ultimately, won. Not by destroying James, but by refusing to let his betrayal destroy me. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and joys, its moments of doubt and clarity. Daniel might become someone important in my life, or he might be just another step on my journey. James's apology might continue to resonate, or it might fade into the background of my story. But tonight, as I drifted toward sleep with Luna purring beside me, I felt at peace with all the possibilities that lay ahead, and with the knowledge that whatever came next, I would face it as this new Emily. The one who had stood up at a wedding and demanded truth, who had walked away and built a life from the ground up, who had learned that the most powerful revenge wasn't in destroying another person's happiness, but in reclaiming her own. 1 year had passed since the wedding, my wedding that never was, and James and Vanessa's wedding that imploded in spectacular fashion. The seasons had cycled through their full rotation, bringing me back to summer, though I was far from where I'd started. My therapist had recently suggested I mark this anniversary somehow, not to dwell on the past, but to acknowledge how far I'd come. Rituals help us process transitions, Dr. Chen had explained. They give shape to experiences that might otherwise feel formless. I'd considered her advice carefully before deciding on a simple ceremony. I would finally delete the proposal video, the last tangible evidence of James's betrayal that I still possessed. Though I hadn't watched it since the wedding day, its continued existence on my laptop felt like a tether to a past I was ready to release completely. Daniel sat across from me at my kitchen table, watching as I navigated to the folder where the video was stored. We'd been dating for 9 months now, our relationship evolving slowly but steadily into something I trusted more with each passing day. He knew the full story. I'd eventually shared every detail, including the wedding confrontation, and had listened without judgment, understanding that my past had shaped me but didn't define me. "Are you sure you want me here for this?" he asked, his voice gentle. "It seems like something you might want to do privately." I considered his question, appreciating his sensitivity. "I'm sure," I replied. "Having you here? It feels right." A bridge between then and now. He nodded, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand briefly before letting go, a gesture of support without possession that I'd come to cherish about him. I located the file, my cursor hovering over it for a moment. "It's strange," I mused. "This video changed everything. Without it, I might still be with James, living in ignorance. Or worse, I might have discovered his affair too late after we were already married." "Do you ever regret it?" Daniel asked. "Using it the way you did?" It was a fair question, one I'd examined thoroughly in therapy. "No," I said after a thoughtful pause. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret the pain it caused Vanessa, who deserved better. But I don't regret standing up for myself, demanding the truth be known." I selected the file, my finger poised over the delete key. Then, on impulse, I minimized the window instead and opened my journal document. "Give me a minute," I said to Daniel, who nodded and stood to refresh his coffee, understanding my need for a moment's reflection. I began to type. "To the woman I was 1 year ago. You stood in that garden with your heart pounding and your hands steady, facing the man who had betrayed you and the woman who unknowingly shared your pain. You were terrified but resolute, choosing truth over comfortable silence, choosing yourself over the approval of others. I want you to know that your courage wasn't wasted. The path hasn't been easy. There have been days of doubt, nights of tears, moments when the weight of starting over seemed overwhelming. But there has also been joy you couldn't have imagined, strength you didn't know you possessed, and a peace that comes from living authentically. You thought that day was an ending, and in many ways it was. But it was also a beginning, the first step toward becoming someone who refuses to accept less than she deserves, who trusts her instincts, who builds relationships based on honesty rather than convenience. I'm proud of you, and I'm ready to let go of the pain you carried while keeping the wisdom you gained. With gratitude, Emily." I saved the document, then returned to the file manager. Daniel came back to the table, setting my favorite mug beside me. A handmade ceramic piece I'd created in my pottery class, imperfect but uniquely mine. "Ready?" he asked, settling beside me. I nodded, selecting the video file once more. "Ready?" With a single keystroke, I deleted it, then emptied the trash folder for good measure. A small action that represented so much more, the final severance of a connection that had once defined me, but now was simply part of a story I'd survived. "How do you feel?" Daniel asked, his expression curious but not intrusive. I took a moment to check in with myself, scanning for any unexpected emotions. "Lighter," I finally said, "like I've put down something heavy I didn't realize I was still carrying." He smiled, the warm, genuine smile that had first drawn me to him at that poetry reading a year ago. "That's good. That's really good." We spent the rest of the evening on my small balcony, watching the sunset paint the city in hues of gold and pink. Luna prowled around our feet, occasionally demanding attention before returning to her important cat business. The conversation flowed easily between light topics and deeper reflections, without the strain I'd often felt with James, that sense of having to manage his emotions alongside my own. As twilight deepened into night, Daniel mentioned an upcoming faculty retreat for which he needed to prepare. "I should probably head home soon," he said, though he made no immediate move to leave. "You could stay," I offered quietly. It wasn't the first time he'd spent the night, but it wasn't yet routine, each time still a conscious choice rather than an assumption. He studied my face. "Are you sure? Today's been significant. I'd understand if you wanted space." His consideration touched me. With James, staying over had eventually become expected rather than invited, my need for occasional solitude interpreted as rejection. Daniel's constant awareness of boundaries, both his and mine, was one of the many differences I had come to treasure. "I'm sure," I confirmed. "Today feels complete somehow, like I've honored the past and now I'm fully in the present. And in the present, I'd like you to stay." He leaned in to kiss me softly. "Then I'll stay." Later, as we lay tangled together in the peaceful darkness of my bedroom, I found myself thinking about the nature of love, how differently it could manifest, how much more complex it was than I had once believed. What I had felt for James had been love, I was sure of that. Not the conditional, convenient affection he had described to Vanessa, but something real and deep on my part. Yet it had been love built partly on illusion, on who I wanted him to be rather than who he truly was. With Daniel, love was evolving differently. It was quieter but more solid, based on seeing each other clearly and choosing each other anyway. It wasn't the desperate, consuming passion I had sometimes felt with James, but something steadier, a warmth that grew rather than flared, that sustained rather than consumed. "You're thinking very loudly," Daniel murmured, his voice thick with approaching sleep. I chuckled. "Sorry, just reflecting on differences." "Between what?" "Between then and now. Between what I thought love was and what I'm learning it can be." He shifted to look at me in the dim light filtering through the curtains. "And what have you learned it can be?" he asked, genuinely interested despite his tiredness. I considered the question, wanting to articulate something that felt both simple and profound. I think real love has room in it," I finally said. "Room to be yourself, room to change, room to question, room to breathe." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "Room to be imperfect too," he added. "To make mistakes and know you won't be discarded for them." "Yes," I agreed, thinking of the small disagreements we'd navigated, the boundaries we'd established, the apologies we'd exchanged when we'd hurt each other unintentionally. None of it had threatened the foundation we were building, because that foundation included the understanding that we were both fallible humans learning to care for each other well. As Daniel drifted to sleep beside me, his breathing deepening into a gentle rhythm, I reflected on how fitting it was that this day, which had begun with an act of letting go, was ending with an affirmation of moving forward. Not rushing, not forcing, but simply being present with the possibilities unfolding between us. I had once believed that my capacity for love had been damaged by James's betrayal, that I would forever approach relationships with suspicion, always bracing for the other shoe to drop. And indeed, learning to trust again hadn't been easy. There had been moments of irrational panic, of pulling away when Daniel got too close, of searching his words for hidden meanings that weren't there. But with patience, his and my own, with therapy, with the practice of choosing vulnerability even when it terrified me, I had discovered that my heart wasn't permanently broken. It had been wounded, yes, but wounds could heal, leaving scars that marked where I'd been hurt but didn't determine where I could go. As sleep began to claim me, I felt a profound gratitude, not just for Daniel or for the life I was creating, but for that past version of myself who had stood up at a wedding and refused to disappear quietly, who had chosen truth over comfort, who had believed even in her deepest pain that she deserved better. That woman had given me this present moment, this quiet contentment, this chance to love again with open eyes. And whatever the future held, whether Daniel and I built something lasting, or whether our paths eventually diverged, I would carry forward the wisdom she had paid so dearly to acquire. The wisdom that love, real love, never requires you to make yourself smaller or to accept deception. That the most profound act of self-love sometimes looks like walking away, and that there is life, rich, complex, beautiful life, after betrayal. I fell asleep with these thoughts drifting through my mind, Luna curled at my feet, Daniel's arm a gentle weight across my waist, the past finally released and the future wide open before me. 2 weeks after deleting the proposal video, I received an unexpected email. The subject line read simply, "An update and a thank you." I was at work, reviewing a marketing campaign for a new client, when the notification appeared in the corner of my screen. The sender's name, Vanessa Lambert, sent a jolt of surprise through me. We hadn't communicated since that evening at the coffee shop nearly 9 months ago, an encounter I had assumed would be our last. I stared at the notification for several minutes, debating whether to open it immediately or wait until I was home. Curiosity won out. I clicked on the email, bracing myself for whatever it might contain. "Emily, I hope this message finds you well. I've thought about reaching out many times over the past months, but wasn't sure if my contact would be welcome. After our conversation last year, I promised not to intrude on your fresh start, and I've respected that promise until now. I'm writing for 2 reasons. First, I wanted you to know that I've accepted a position with a nonprofit organization in Seattle that provides legal support to domestic violence survivors. It's meaningful work that feels right for this next chapter of my life, though it means leaving behind the city where both of us experienced so much pain. Before I go, I felt compelled to express my continuing gratitude for what you did, however difficult it was at the time. Second, I thought you should know that James has been trying to find you. He mentioned it when we had our final conversation to settle some financial matters that remained entangled since the canceled wedding. He seemed genuinely concerned about your well-being, though I made it clear I had no information to share even if I'd been inclined to do so. I don't tell you this to disrupt your peace or reopen old wounds. Rather, I thought you deserved to be prepared in case he does manage to locate you. From what little he said, I gathered he's been in therapy and is attempting to make amends for his actions. Whether that includes you is, of course, entirely your decision. My flight leaves in 3 days. I find myself feeling strangely optimistic about this new beginning, something I couldn't have imagined in the aftermath of that devastating day. Whatever roads led us here, I'm grateful our paths crossed, if only briefly. You helped me avoid a marriage built on lies, and in doing so, you freed me to find a future built on truth. Wishing you all the best in your journey forward, Vanessa. I read the email twice, processing the information and my reaction to it. There was no anger, no resentment, not even the awkwardness I might have expected. Instead, I felt a quiet appreciation for her thoughtfulness in warning me about James and genuine happiness about her new position. The news that James was trying to find me was less welcome, though not entirely surprising. He had always struggled with unresolved endings, preferring to maintain connections even when they no longer served a purpose. His need for amends felt more about easing his conscience than addressing my pain, a realization that would have once hurt but now simply informed my response. After considering for a moment, I clicked reply, Vanessa, thank you for your email. I'm doing well, building a life that feels increasingly authentic and satisfying. I'm glad to hear you're embarking on a new chapter too. The position in Seattle sounds perfect for your skills and compassion. I have no doubt the clients you serve will benefit greatly from both. I appreciate the heads up about James. Actually, he managed to find me about 2 weeks ago, called from an unknown number. We had a brief conversation where he apologized. I acknowledged his apology but made it clear I've moved on and don't wish to re-establish contact. So far, he seems to be respecting that boundary. It's strange to think how differently our lives might have unfolded if not for that day at Riverside Gardens. While I would never choose the pain we both experienced, I can't regret the truth it revealed or the growth it ultimately sparked. Seattle is beautiful. I visited once years ago and was struck by the landscape and the energy of the city. I hope it welcomes you with new friendships, meaningful work, and the fresh start you're seeking. Safe travels and best wishes for this next chapter. Emily. I sent the email, then returned to my work, though my mind kept drifting back to Vanessa's message. There was something deeply satisfying about the knowledge that she was building a new life, that the pain of James's betrayal hadn't defined her future. It reinforced my belief that exposing the truth, however painful in the moment, had ultimately been an act of liberation for us both. That evening, I shared the exchange with Daniel over dinner at his apartment, a cozy one-bedroom filled with books and plants that reflected his thoughtful, nurturing nature. So James found you before Vanessa's warning, he noted, passing me a bowl of the stir-fry he'd prepared. You never mentioned it. I accepted the bowl, noticing the slight furrow between his brows. I should have told you, I acknowledged. It didn't seem significant at the time. The call lasted maybe 5 minutes, and I had no intention of engaging further. Daniel nodded, his expression relaxing. I'm not upset that you didn't tell me. I just wonder why it felt insignificant to you when it seems like it would have been a pretty emotional encounter. It was a perceptive question, one that made me examine my own response more deeply. I think because it didn't impact me the way I once thought it would, I explained slowly. I always imagined that if James ever apologized, it would feel momentous, either devastatingly painful or profoundly healing. But when it actually happened, it just felt small, like a footnote rather than a new chapter. That makes sense, Daniel said. It means you've truly moved beyond it. His words no longer have the power to define your emotional state. Exactly, I agreed, feeling grateful for his understanding. A year ago, his apology would have consumed me. Now it was just a brief conversation that didn't change anything about my life or how I feel about myself. Daniel smiled, reaching across the table to touch my hand briefly. That's real healing. We finished dinner, the conversation shifting to other topics: his upcoming faculty presentation, my recent promotion at work, plans for a weekend hike if the weather cooperated. The email from Vanessa and the call from James faded into the background, relevant but not central to our shared present. Later, as we washed dishes together in comfortable silence, I found myself reflecting on how differently I experienced intimacy with Daniel compared to my relationship with James. With James, I had often felt as though I was performing, carefully managing my reactions, censoring thoughts that might displease him, constantly vigilant about maintaining his interest and approval. With Daniel, I simply was, the woman who laughed too loudly sometimes, who occasionally needed space to process her emotions alone, who had strong opinions and wasn't afraid to express them, who had been deeply hurt but refused to let that hurt define her. "You're smiling," Daniel observed, handing me a plate to dry. "Just thinking about how nice this is," I replied. "The ordinary moments." He leaned over to kiss my temple, leaving a small soap bubble behind that made me laugh. "The ordinary moments are my favorites," he said simply. And they were mine too, I realized. The quiet evenings cooking together, the Sunday mornings reading in companionable silence, the disagreements resolved through honest conversation rather than manipulation or withdrawal, the knowledge that I was chosen daily, not out of convenience or habit, but because this man genuinely valued who I truly was. That night, in the darkness of Daniel's bedroom, I found myself thinking about Vanessa's journey. She was starting fresh in a new city, pursuing work that would transform her pain into purpose by helping others navigate their own difficult relationships. There was a poetry to that, a beautiful alchemy that transmuted suffering into service. I wondered if she still thought about James, if she sometimes woke in the night remembering the moment when the video had revealed his true nature. I wondered if she, like me, had moments of inexplicable gratitude for a betrayal that had ultimately freed her from a life built on deception. As I drifted toward sleep, Daniel's steady breathing beside me, I sent a silent wish across the miles to Vanessa in her preparations for Seattle. May she find rain-washed mornings that felt like new beginnings. May she discover friendships that honored her boundaries and respected her story. May she build a life so rich and meaningful that James became nothing more than a stepping stone on her path to something better. And in that wish for her healing, I recognized the completeness of my own. The fact that I could think of James without bitterness, of Vanessa with genuine goodwill, was perhaps the clearest evidence that I had truly moved beyond the pain that had once threatened to define me. The revenge I had planned so meticulously, executed in a moment of cold determination, had served its purpose. Not just in exposing James's deception or in reclaiming my narrative, but in forcing me to rebuild from the ground up, to examine what I truly wanted and needed in relationships, to discover the strength that had always existed beneath my accommodating exterior. As sleep claimed me, my last conscious thought was a recognition that sometimes the most complete revenge isn't in causing pain to those who have hurt you, but in refusing to let that hurt determine your future. In building something so beautiful from the ashes that those who caused the fire become irrelevant to the story you're living now. The Seattle skyline emerged from the clouds as our plane began its descent, the Space Needle punctuating the urban landscape against a backdrop of mountains and water. Beside me, Daniel squeezed my hand, his excitement palpable. "It's as beautiful as I remembered," I said, leaning closer to the window. It had been 6 months since Vanessa's email announcing her move to Seattle, 6 months of continued growth and deepening connection with Daniel. When he had been invited to present at an education conference in Seattle, suggesting we extend the trip into a proper vacation, it had felt like perfect timing. I was long overdue for time away from work, and the Pacific Northwest had been on my travel wish list for years. "Should we try to visit that Japanese garden you read about tomorrow, or save it for Tuesday?" Daniel asked as we taxied toward the gate. "Tuesday might be better," I replied. "The forecast shows better weather, and I'd hate to see it in the rain." He nodded, pulling out his phone to update our rough itinerary. Daniel's thoughtful planning balanced with flexibility was yet another aspect of our relationship I cherished, so different from James's tendency to either control every detail or abdicate responsibility entirely. As we collected our luggage and navigated toward the rental car counter, I couldn't help but wonder if Vanessa had settled into her new life here. Had the city welcomed her? Had she found community in this place of fresh starts? I hadn't contacted her since our email exchange, respecting the natural conclusion of our brief connection. Emily? Daniel's voice pulled me from my thoughts. They're asking about insurance options. I refocused on the present, discussing coverage options with the rental agent, then followed Daniel to the parking garage where our car awaited. Within an hour, we were checking into our hotel, a boutique property in the Capitol Hill neighborhood known for its vibrant culture and diverse dining options. "I'm starving," Daniel announced once we'd deposited our luggage in the room. "That place you mentioned with the wood-fired pizza is only a few blocks from here. Feel up to walking?" "Definitely," I agreed. "I need to stretch after that flight." We spent the evening exploring the neighborhood, enjoying pizza that lived up to its online reviews, and planning our week ahead. Daniel's conference would occupy his mornings for the first 3 days, leaving his afternoons and our final 2 days completely free for sightseeing and relaxation. The following morning, after seeing Daniel off to his conference, I decided to visit a renowned local bookstore. Armed with a cup of excellent coffee, I browsed the shelves, eventually settling into a comfortable chair with a novel I'd been meaning to read for months. It was a luxury to have unstructured time, to follow my interests without deadlines or obligations pressing at the edges of my attention. I was so absorbed in my book that I almost didn't register the voice calling my name. When it came again, slightly louder, I looked up in confusion. "Emily? Is that you?" Standing a few feet away, a stack of books in her arms, was Vanessa. Her hair was shorter than when I'd last seen her, cut into a stylish bob that framed her face beautifully. She looked healthy, relaxed, a woman at home in her surroundings rather than the shocked bride or cautious coffee shop companion of our previous encounters. "Vanessa," I said, closing my book and standing. "What a coincidence." She smiled, the expression reaching her eyes in a way I didn't remember from before. "It really is. Seattle may be a major city, but it still manages to feel like a small town sometimes." She gestured to my book. "Are you visiting or just visiting?" I confirmed. "My boyfriend is attending a conference here this week, so we decided to make a vacation of it." "Well, welcome," she said warmly. Then, after a moment's hesitation, "This might seem strange, but would you like to grab coffee? There's a great cafe just down the block." Under other circumstances, I might have politely declined. But something about the genuineness of her invitation, combined with the curiosity I'd felt about her new life here, made me nod. "I'd like that, actually." We paid for our books, then walked together to the cafe Vanessa recommended, a cozy space with large windows overlooking a small park. After ordering a latte for her, chai for me, we settled at a corner table. "So," she began, "how have you been? Your email sounded positive, but that was months ago." "I've been well," I replied. "Work is challenging in the best ways. I'm still doing pottery, actually getting decent at it now. And things with Daniel, my boyfriend, are—" I paused, searching for words that wouldn't seem insensitive given our history. "They're good. Healthy. Different from what I experienced before." She nodded, understanding the unspoken comparison. "I'm genuinely happy for you. After what we both went through, finding a relationship based on honesty must feel like coming home." Her phrasing struck me as particularly apt. "It does," I agreed, like I've been holding my breath without realizing it, and now I can finally exhale. I stirred my chai, then asked, "How about you? Has Seattle been the fresh start you hoped for?" Her face brightened. "It has. The work is exactly what I needed. Challenging, meaningful, sometimes heartbreaking, but ultimately rewarding. I've made friends who know nothing about my almost wedding, who just see me as I am now. And I've started rock climbing of all things." She laughed. "Something I never would have tried in my old life." "Rock climbing?" I repeated, smiling at the image. "That's impressive." "It's terrifying and exhilarating," she admitted. "But there's something powerful about literally learning to hold yourself up, to trust your own strength." She paused, then added more quietly, "After discovering how completely I'd been deceived, I needed to rebuild trust, not just in others, but in myself, in my own judgment." I nodded, understanding completely. I went through the same process, questioning everything I thought I knew, wondering how I could have been so blind to the signs. "Exactly," she agreed. "But the thing is, we weren't blind. We were trusting. There's a difference. Trust isn't a weakness. It's a necessity for any meaningful relationship. James exploited that, but that doesn't mean we were wrong to be capable of trust." Her insight resonated deeply with what I'd worked through in therapy. "That distinction took me a long time to accept," I admitted. "But you're right. Being able to trust is actually a strength, even if it makes us vulnerable sometimes. We fell into conversation that flowed with surprising ease, sharing our journeys of the past year, the difficult moments, the breakthroughs, the unexpected joys discovered along the way. There was no awkwardness, no shadow of James between us, just two women who had traversed similar terrain and emerged stronger for the journey. As our coffee cups emptied, Vanessa glanced at her watch. I should get going soon. I have a client meeting at 1. Of course, I said. Thank you for suggesting this. It's been really nice to catch up. She hesitated, then reached into her bag for a business card. If you and Daniel are free tomorrow evening, a friend of mine is having a small gathering at her place, just a casual dinner with interesting people. You'd be more than welcome to join. I accepted the card, touched by the invitation. I'll check with Daniel, but that sounds lovely. We exchanged brief hugs before parting ways, a gesture that would have seemed unimaginable a year earlier. As I watched her walk away, confident and purposeful, I felt a profound sense of closure mixed with an unexpected appreciation for how our lives had intersected. When I met Daniel back at the hotel later that afternoon, I shared the unexpected encounter and the dinner invitation. That's unusual, he said, his expression curious rather than concerned. How did it feel to see her again? Surprisingly normal, I replied. There was no tension, no lingering resentment. Just two people who went through something difficult and came out the other side. He considered this. And the dinner invitation? Are you comfortable with that? I think I am, I said, realizing the truth of it as I spoke. She's built a life here that seems fulfilling. I'm genuinely interested in seeing that, in knowing she's okay. And I think maybe she feels the same about me. Daniel nodded. Then let's go. I'm intrigued to meet her after everything you've told me. The following evening found us climbing the stairs to a charming apartment in a renovated historic building near the water. Vanessa greeted us warmly, introducing Daniel to the small gathering of her Seattle friends, an eclectic mix that included her rock climbing instructor, two colleagues from the nonprofit, a local artist, and a chef who had prepared the impressive spread on the dining table. What might have been an awkward evening turned out to be delightful. Daniel fell into easy conversation with Vanessa's colleagues about educational approaches for trauma survivors, while I found myself fascinated by the artist's description of her work with reclaimed materials. Vanessa moved through the space with a graceful confidence I hadn't seen in our previous encounters, clearly at home among these people who knew her only as she was now, not as who she had been before. At one point during the evening, I found myself alone with Vanessa on the small balcony overlooking the water, the conversations from inside creating a gentle backdrop. Thank you for including us tonight, I said, watching the lights reflect on the dark surface of the Sound. Your friends are wonderful. She smiled, leaning against the railing. They are. I got lucky finding my people so quickly here. She glanced at me. Daniel seems wonderful too. The way he looks at you, it's how someone should look at the person they love. He is wonderful, I agreed. It took time for me to fully trust it, to believe I deserved that kind of relationship. But he was patient. Vanessa nodded. I've been dating a little, she shared. Nothing serious yet, but I'm open to possibilities now. For a while after everything happened, I couldn't imagine letting anyone close enough to hurt me again. I understand that completely, I said. Vulnerability feels like such a risk after betrayal. It does, she agreed. But a life without vulnerability is also a life without real connection. She turned to face me directly. I never asked you this before, and tell me if it's crossing a line, but do you ever regret how you handled things? With the video at the wedding? The question didn't offend me. If anything, I appreciated her directness. I've thought about that a lot, I admitted. There are moments when I wonder if I could have found a less public way to expose the truth. But honestly, no, I don't regret it. Not because it hurt James, though I can't deny I wanted that at the time, but because it forced a clean break, a complete reckoning that couldn't be explained away or minimized. She was quiet for a moment. I was devastated that day, she finally said. But with time and perspective, I've come to see it as you do, a clean break that allowed for real healing afterward. If you had told me privately, I might have let James convince me it was a misunderstanding, that you were exaggerating. Seeing that video in that moment left no room for denial. That's exactly it, I agreed. For both of us, it was a moment of absolute clarity. Painful, yes, but necessary. James reached out again last month, she said, the change of subject catching me by surprise. He's still in therapy, still working through his issues. He wanted to know if I could ever forgive him. Could you? I asked, genuinely curious. She considered the question. I think I already have, in a sense. Not for his benefit, but for mine. Holding on to anger was exhausting. But forgiveness doesn't mean allowing someone back into your life, especially someone who's proven they're capable of such calculated deception. What did you tell him? That I wished him well with his healing journey, but that our chapter was definitively closed, she replied. That forgiveness and reconciliation aren't the same thing. I nodded, appreciating the wisdom in her approach. That's where I've landed too. I don't hate him anymore. I don't even think about him most days. But I would never allow him back into my life in any capacity. Exactly, she agreed. Then, with a small smile, it's strange to think that his betrayal is what connected us. That something so painful could lead to, whatever this is, a friendship of sorts? I think it is a friendship, I said, realizing the truth of it. An unusual one certainly, but genuine nonetheless. We rejoined the party shortly after, the conversation shifting to lighter topics. As the evening progressed, I watched Daniel engaging animatedly with Vanessa's friends, his natural warmth and curiosity drawing people to him. I felt a surge of gratitude for this man who had entered my life when I was still healing, who had never rushed me or demanded certainty before I was ready to offer it. When we said our goodbyes, Vanessa hugged us both, extracting promises to keep in touch occasionally and to let her know if we ever returned to Seattle. As Daniel and I walked back to our hotel hand in hand, the night air cool against our skin, I felt a sense of completion that went beyond the pleasant evening. You're quiet, Daniel observed after a few blocks. Everything okay? More than okay, I assured him. Just thinking about how life takes unexpected turns. 2 years ago, I never could have imagined standing on a balcony in Seattle, having a friendly conversation with the woman my fiancé left me for. Never could have imagined meeting someone like you after having my heart so thoroughly broken. He squeezed my hand. Life's full of plot twists. It is, I agreed. But I'm starting to think the unexpected turns often lead to where we're meant to be, even if the journey is painful. Daniel stopped walking, turning to face me under a streetlight. His expression was serious but tender. I've been waiting for the right moment to say this, and somehow this feels like it. He took both my hands in his. I love you, Emily. Not despite your past or because of it, but alongside it. I love who you are now, who you've always been underneath the pain, who you're becoming every day. The words washed over me, simple and profound. We had been moving toward this declaration for months, both of us careful not to rush, to ensure that when these words were spoken, they would be absolutely true. I love you too, I replied, the statement feeling both momentous and natural, like stepping through a doorway I'd been approaching gradually all along. With open eyes and a whole heart, he kissed me then, gentle and unhurried, there on a Seattle street corner thousands of miles from where my heart had been broken. And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that the pain had been worth it, not just bearable or educational, but genuinely worth it, because it had cleared the path to this relationship built on honesty, respect, and mutual choice. As we continued our walk back to the hotel, Daniel's arm around my shoulders, I thought about the woman I had been when I discovered James's betrayal, how broken I had felt, how certain that I would never trust again, never love again, never feel whole again. I wished I could reach back through time to tell her that the devastation was temporary, that it was clearing ground for something better to be built. But perhaps she had known that already, somewhere deep inside. Perhaps that knowledge had been what gave her the courage to stand up at that wedding, to demand truth even when it hurt, to walk away from a relationship that diminished her worth. Perhaps she had sensed, even in her darkest moment, that her story wasn't ending but transforming. The final 2 days of our Seattle vacation passed in a blur of sightseeing, excellent food, and the particular joy that comes from exploring a new place with someone you love. We didn't see Vanessa again, though we exchanged a few texts about recommended spots to visit before leaving the city. On our last morning, as we packed for our flight home, Daniel emerged from the bathroom with a thoughtful expression. I've been thinking about something Vanessa said at the dinner party, he said. About how trauma can either close us off from life or open us to deeper experiences of it. I nodded, folding a sweater into my suitcase. I remember that. It was while she was talking about her work with domestic violence survivors. Right, he confirmed, sitting on the edge of the bed. It struck me because that's exactly what you did. You chose to let your experience open you rather than close you. Even when it would have been easier, safer to withdraw? His observation warmed me. I had help, I reminded him. Therapy, supportive friends, you. But the choice was still yours, he insisted. Every step of the way you chose courage over comfort, growth over stagnation. It's one of the things I admire most about you. I set aside the clothing I was packing and moved to sit beside him. The woman who stood up at that wedding wouldn't recognize the life I have now, I mused. She was focused solely on survival, on justice, on making sure James couldn't simply walk away from what he'd done. She couldn't see past that moment. But that moment led here, Daniel said, taking my hand. It did, I agreed. And I'm profoundly grateful for that, even while acknowledging the pain it took to arrive. As our plane lifted off from Seattle later that day, I watched the city recede below us, the place where Vanessa had rebuilt her life, where Daniel had first told me he loved me, where another piece of my healing journey had unexpectedly fallen into place. I felt a curious blend of nostalgia and anticipation, a sense of chapters closing and opening simultaneously. Daniel dozed beside me, his head resting against my shoulder. I turned from the window to study his face, relaxed in sleep, and felt a surge of protectiveness mingled with deep affection. What we were building together wasn't perfect, no relationship could be, but it was honest, equal, and kind in ways my relationship with James never had been. 3 days after our return from Seattle, I met with Dr. Chen for my monthly therapy session. As I shared the experience of reconnecting with Vanessa and the evolution of my relationship with Daniel, I noticed her smiling. "What?" I asked, pausing mid-sentence. "Do you realize you've gone this entire session without mentioning James directly?" She pointed out. "You've referred to my past relationship and what happened before, but you haven't used his name once." I hadn't noticed, but she was right. "Is that significant?" "I think it is," she replied. "It suggests he's no longer a central figure in your narrative. He's become context rather than content." Her observation resonated deeply. James had indeed receded from the foreground of my life story, becoming simply the backdrop against which my true journey had unfolded, the journey toward authentic self-worth and genuine connection. "There's something else I've been considering," I said, suddenly certain about a decision that had been forming gradually over recent months. "I think I'm ready to end our regular sessions." "Doctor?" Chen nodded, unsurprised. "I've been expecting this. You've done remarkable work, Emily. How do you feel about the idea of concluding therapy?" "Ready?" I said simply. Not because everything's perfect or because I'll never face challenges again, but because I have the tools to navigate them now. I know my worth. I trust my instincts. I can set boundaries and communicate needs. I smiled. "I can always come back if I need to, right?" "Absolutely," she assured me. "My door is always open." "But I agree. You've reached a place of genuine healing and resilience. You don't need regular sessions to maintain that." We spent the remainder of our time discussing transition and closure, setting a date for a final session the following month. As I left her office, I felt lighter, not because therapy had been a burden, but because completing it represented another milestone in my journey forward. That evening, I sat on my balcony with Luna, who had grown into a dignified adult cat with definite opinions about her domain. Daniel would be coming over later for dinner, but for now, I savored the quiet moment alone, reflecting on all that had transpired since that fateful day at James's wedding. The revenge I had so carefully planned had served its purpose, not just in exposing James's deception, but in forcing me to reckon with my own worth, my own needs, my own capacity for resilience. What had begun as an act of righteous anger had transformed into a catalyst for profound personal growth. I no longer needed James to suffer to validate my experience. I no longer needed Vanessa's pain to justify my own. I no longer needed the dramatic confrontation at the wedding to define who I was or what I deserved. Those needs had fallen away as I built a life rooted in self-respect rather than external validation, in honest connection rather than convenient companionship, in growth rather than stagnation. Luna stretched beside me, then jumped from the chair to investigate something more interesting inside the apartment. I smiled, watching her go, appreciating her feline self-sufficiency while looking forward to Daniel's arrival and the evening we would share. My phone buzzed with a text notification. Daniel, letting me know he was picking up ingredients for the dinner we planned to cook together and asking if there was anything specific I wanted. I replied with a simple request for a particular wine I'd been enjoying lately, then set my phone aside, content in the knowledge that soon he would be here. Not because he needed something from me or because it was expected, but because we genuinely enjoyed building a life together, one ordinary evening at a time. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reminded me of that evening on Vanessa's balcony in Seattle. I thought about her, hoping she was continuing to thrive in her new life, that she was finding the same peace and purpose that I had discovered. As darkness gradually claimed the sky, stars appearing one by one above the city lights, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for where I was now, but for the difficult path that had led here. For the pain that had forced growth, the loss that had created space for something better, the betrayal that had ultimately freed me to find authentic love. The woman who had stood up at James's wedding, showing the video of him proposing to me while planning a life with someone else, had been acting from a place of deep hurt and righteous anger. She had wanted truth revealed, justice served, consequences felt. But the woman sitting on this balcony, 2 years later, understood that the greatest revenge hadn't been in James's public humiliation or in Vanessa's shocked realization. It had been in what came afterward, in the life rebuilt on stronger foundations, in the capacity to love without fear, in the quiet confidence that no one else's actions could ever again determine my worth. I heard Daniel's key in the lock. He had his own key now, a step we had taken recently after careful consideration, rather than drifting into it by default. Luna raced to greet him, her feline devotion won by his consistent kindness and the treats he occasionally slipped her despite my mock protests. "Hey," he called, his voice carrying to the balcony. "I come bearing gifts of wine and fresh bread from that bakery you love." I smiled, rising to join him inside. "Perfect timing," I replied. "I was just thinking about how lucky I am." And I was lucky, not despite the betrayal I had experienced, but in some strange way because of it. Because it had shown me exactly what I didn't want, cleared space for what I truly needed, and given me the courage to accept nothing less. The revenge I had planned at James's wedding had succeeded beyond anything I could have imagined. Not because it had destroyed him, but because it had freed me to become the woman I was always meant to be, to find the love I truly deserved, to build a life that was authentically, imperfectly, wonderfully mine. As I stepped inside to greet Daniel, closing the balcony door on the starlit sky, I knew that the story that had begun with heartbreak had transformed into something unexpected and beautiful. A journey not of victimhood but of reclamation, not of vengeance but of grace. And in that transformation lay the truest, most complete revenge of all.